Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Shafil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Maulana Khalid Saab, to thank Firdaus Academy, and also the Masjid Committee for giving me the opportunity to convey the message of Allah and His beloved Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the tawfiq and the ability to act upon what will be said today, and also may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it a source of success and also a sadaqah jariyah for all the brothers and sisters who have attended, and also for all the brothers and sisters who have volunteered in organizing this particular event. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them abundantly in this world and also in the hereafter. Ameen thumma ameen. The ulamas and the scholars have categorized ilm and knowledge into two types. The first type is called the fard ayn, and the second type is called fard kifaya. And examples of fard kifaya, a communal obligation, are ulums or sciences in relating to tafsir, in relating to the detailed explanation of the verses of the Holy Quran, the detailed explanation in terms of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not mandatory for every single person, Muslim or a Muslimah, to know about the detailed tafsir, the aqwals, the opinions regarding every single verse of the Quran and regarding every single hadith, which may be in Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abu Dawood, and so on. But at least there should be one person in that community, one member of society who possesses the ulum and the knowledge in terms of the tafsir of the Holy Quran and in terms of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is what we call a communal obligation. Thereafterwards, we then have some other types of ulum and knowledge, which is fard and obligatory for every single believer, Muslim or a Muslimah, whether you're pious, whether you are not pious, whether you pray 5 times a day or you don't pray 5 times a day. There are some ulums which are actually a must for every single Muslim. That's why that very famous hadith, Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Talabul ilmi faridatun ala kulli Muslim." So talabul ilm, i.e. talabu ilm, a fardul ayn ilm. So to seek the compulsory level of knowledge is fard upon every single Muslim. Now then that takes us on to the next point, is what's the differentiation? What do we categorize those ulum to be a fard ayn, that which is mandatory and necessary for every single Muslim, male and female, to know, and for every single Muslim, male and female, to possess? Now, examples of fard ayn knowledge are those things, those practical things, which we do every single day, which we may need to do once in a lifetime, which we may need to do once in a year. So, for example, every day, 5 prayers are fard and obligatory upon us. So, therefore, it is mandatory and necessary that we Muslims and Muslimas are aware of all the rulings, of all the masails, and all the conditions, prerequisites of salah. And because tahara and purification is the key to salah, it is also necessary for us to know the exact rulings. What are the faraid of wudu? Which situations our wudu breaks or is nullified? Situations regarding ghusl, when does ghusl become fard, and so on. Now moving along, marriage. Now marriage is also a fard ayn type of ilm and knowledge, because either every single one of us here are already married, or the very, very least we are thinking to get married. Some of us may be here that we're already married and we are fulfilling the huquqs and the rights of our wives, but then we are thinking of getting our sons and our daughters married. So what are the rules and the regulations with regards to that? And this is why today's course, it's not an optional type of ulum. It's not something which is farz kifaya that, okay, as long as sheikhs are here or the muftiyani kirams are here and they know the masails, that's fine. We'll just go with the flow. No, actually today's course is actually tailored for every single person here. Those who are married, I'm sure we'll be able to benefit from this particular course in terms of the rules, the regulations, the huquqs of our wives. Those who are thinking of getting married, so it's very, very important in terms of what criteria which we need to look at when it comes to selecting a spouse. And then as I was saying, that there may be some of us who are already married, we are in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and we have children who are of marriageable age. Then what things, what rules the Sharia has placed upon us when it comes to getting our children, our daughters, our sons married? What are the rights, what are the rules, what are the regulations, what things which we need to look at in our daughter-in-law, in our son-in-law. So alhamdulillah, today's course is actually will benefit every single one of us. So there shouldn't be anyone thinking that, or perhaps this course is not really tailored for me, but the reality is that actually this course has been tailored in such a way that I'm sure every single one of us, brothers and sisters, those who are old, those who are young, can actually benefit from the advice, from the rules, from the adab, and from the huquqs of today's particular course. Hence, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I said at the beginning, reward the brothers and sisters for organizing this event, because one of the reasons why I'm actually doing this course, because I remember before I flew out last week, because I actually teach a lot of books in the madrasa, many of the higher books. So one of the students was actually saying, like, Mufti Saab, Fiqh of Marriage, it's a very common course. Yes, so many institutions, so many shuyukh, so many organizations have actually touched on this particular topic. Is there a need to deliver this topic again? And I actually said to that student that actually I reckon topics regarding marriage and divorce, even though institutions and shuyukhs may have spoken about it and there may have been many, many one-day courses arranged, but I feel that it is a must and necessary that at least once a year there's always a refresher course on this particular topic. Because this Fiqh of Marriage course, I actually delivered it in 2011, 2010, 2011. So you're looking at a good 6-7 years ago. And now I'm going to deliver it again today. But many of the notes which I used 7-8 years ago is totally different to what I'm going to say to you now. Because in 7-8 years, like these past 7-8 years, so many things have happened. There's different challenges now, especially with social media. and a lot of other problems. There's actually more challenges in marriages than there were 7-8 years ago when I first delivered this particular talk and this particular lecture. Likewise, some shuyukhs who may have delivered this talk and lecture a decade or so ago, there were different challenges a decade ago which perhaps don't exist now. So the point I'm trying to make is, and I always say this to our students, that according to time, a lot of the fatawas, a lot of the rulings change, and sometimes it's not all the time about the fiqh, which I will explain later. Sometimes it's about just using your wisdom, just using a bit of hikmah to kind of like deal with issues. It's not always you can just be straight to the point and be blunt and say this and say that and apply rules. Sometimes you just have to use a bit of wisdom and hikmah. So this particular course, I'll say, is very, very important, and just some examples of some challenges which I've noticed over the past 5 to 6 years. I think one challenge in particular, especially nowadays, is this kind of dislike in getting married. It's a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but nowadays with a lot of youngsters, I've noticed that there's this kind of dislike in getting married. They don't want to get married. They just want to live, like a single, be happy, go out whenever. They don't like responsibilities. When you tell them about marriage and wife and children and earning and working and being the breadwinner, some youngsters, they start getting panic attacks. They can't cope. They get scared. They fall into depression. They'd rather be single without any responsibilities. So you have that issue from many of the youngsters. Also at the same time, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive some of the shortcomings of our elders, but sometimes they are also at fault as well. Sometimes too many demands from parents that you can't get married unless you have a full-time job, you're earning this much amount of money, you can buy your own house, and only then you can get married. And we know the reality. What happens is that somebody who's in their mid-20s, with all the fitna which is outside on the social media, and they're not allowed to get married in a lawful, in a halal way. So then what normally happens, I'm sure many of them do have girlfriends on the side, they commit zina, they commit fornication. A study one of our actually students did, he was actually a university student as well, but he comes and studies with us in the evening. He's doing kind of like a research on all this like pedophilia, child abuse. What's the main reason behind all these things? There's something new, especially in the UK, something new. Over the past 10 years, a lot of cases of Muslims, forget about non-Muslims, Muslim men, some, Allah forbid, beard as well, imams as well, only Allah knows the full story of being convicted of sexual abuse, sexual assault. Why? Why has that been the case? So one of the main reasons is regarding sexual frustration. Sexual frustration, i.e. because of not being allowed to get married when the time is for them to get married, leading towards pornography, leading towards abuse and sexual abuse and so on and so forth. There's like a link between all of that. Again, I don't want to delve into that today's lecture. That in itself is like a different course in its own right, and perhaps request Sheikh Saab to kind of organize something on that, which I think will be very, very beneficial for the Muslim masses, inshallah, in the future. Anyway, as I was saying, that problems sometimes comes from parents, like demands. You need to be earning before you can get married. Also, sometimes I've noticed that there's also shortcomings from the parents upon their daughters as well. So it's not always looking at it from a man's perspective or from the son's perspective. Sometimes it's also upon the daughter's side as well. So sometimes what happens is that many parents, they don't want to lose their daughter. They don't want to see their daughter moving on. So their daughters are in their late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s. And they're just like happy with their daughter just being at home. They don't want to see them get married and move on with their life. Sometimes parents are happy that, oh, mashallah, my daughter's a doctor, she's a doctor at the hospital, or she's a lawyer, and she's getting a lot of money into the house. So parents don't want to lose the money, which their daughters are raking in. So then what happens is they don't get their daughters married until they hit late 30s, early 40s. And as you know, when you hit that particular age, it's very difficult to very difficult to get married at that particular time. People start asking questions, well, you're 30, 40, why haven't you got married? Is there something wrong with you? So the point I'm trying to make here is that, the point I'm trying to make in a nutshell is that there's zulm, but from different angles. You know, it's not just only the boys, it's not only the girls, its parents are also involved as well, culture we live in, society we live in, peer pressure, then you get the social media fitna outside and other kind of challenges. And all that together, subhanAllah, has made marriage, which is supposed to be a sacred institution, a sacred union, has given marriage a very, very, critical, has given marriage a very bad press in society, that nowadays it's just considered to be normal not to get married, but just to live together as a boyfriend, girlfriend, as a couple. That is something which is encouraged widely in society. And I'm sure a time will come, even within our own Muslim ummah, we kind of see that nowadays anyway, of boyfriend, girlfriend being very common to the extent that, forget about doing a halal marriage, a time will come, I'm sure this will come as well, because as Prophet ﷺ said, that a time will come when we Muslims will imitate the non-Muslims in everything. If that means that the non-Muslims enter into a hole of a lizard, the Muslims will follow. And then Prophet ﷺ and the Sahabas asked, O Prophet of Allah, who do you mean? Do you mean the Christians and the Jews? Prophet ﷺ said, who else? So I'm sure a time will come that we will also be copying them in every single thing. The point I'm trying to make here is that the idea of today's program and today's course is, alhamdulillah, just to explain many of these points, to clarify a lot of these points, also at the same time to encourage that the way to gain true love is through the union of marriage and nikah. It's not done through lust, it's not done through any other unlawful and haram ways. And inshallah, the intention is always from these types of programs is to inshallah, give the brothers the true understanding of the sunnah of marriage, also likewise with the elders and with their parents, to give yourselves the guidance on how to choose someone, if you want, that is for your son, for your daughter. And inshallah, through that particular way, you will see that a lot of things which we see nowadays in society, whether regarding single parents and then their children, as mentioned in one of the surveys, that children from broken families or from single parent families, illa mashallah, more likely to commit crime. In the UK, that is. I'm not sure what the facts and figures are here in Australia, but definitely in the UK, then it all comes down to marriage. So what I want to explain is that inshallah it's a very, very important topic, and inshallah we'll try to explain this topic to the best of my ability. And as I said, this course is for everyone, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq to kind of listen and to act and to practice, and give us tawfiq to act upon what has been said. I mean, now if we have a look at the first page which is in front of us, love in Islam. Now I'm not going to read through every single paragraph because of lack of time. I'm just going to explain around most of the points. So the first point here is with regards to love in Islam. Now a great muhaddith who recently passed away, Sheikh Yunus Jaunfuri rahimullah, he actually once made a statement, or once mentioned, that there are two types of love. One is the love of ishq. Ishq basically means the love or lust, if you want to say. And that is this classic example of boyfriend, girlfriend, that's more based on ishq, lust. And Sheikh Yunus was saying that marriage which is done via ishq, lust, they eventually break down. Illa mashallah. Again, there will always be exception to the rule, but eventually they will break down. And the reason why is because their foundation was based on fisq. Their foundation was based on sins. So in other words, because obviously before they even got married, they've been in contact with each other, there's been interaction, some cases there's already been fornication, and then they're getting married, so that marriage is based on fisq. The foundation is based on transgression. So over time, the base of that marriage will collapse. It's like, say, for example, you have two types of masjids. You have the masjid built on taqwa, and then there was the example of the masjid during Prophet ﷺ's time, known as Masjid al-Dirar, which the hypocrites had made. And that was based on dirar, to harm the Muslims who were there in Medina Munawwara. So that is one type of marriage. Then you have another type of marriage, which is then based on, say for example, love, muhabba, sometimes based on what your parents choose for you. We'll look at that later, inshallah, about parents choosing someone for you. So those types of marriage, you will notice that even though there may be problems, but due to the du'as of your parents, whatever calamity, whatever difficulty you go through, just because of the du'as of your parents, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He removes those calamities and those difficulties. Now going back to the point which has been mentioned here, love in Islam. Remember, there's two things. One is that love, that true love. And true love is created through the union of marriage. So it's like two people, they get together, whether the two people have been arranged by parents or whether it was done through a third party, but there wasn't any kind of like interaction before, dating before, there wasn't any kind of na'udhu fornication before, but they met, the only time they met legitimately was through the union of nikah. And then over time, they kind of like build on their marriage, they have children, they build on their marriage, they go through the difficulties in life, and then they enjoy the happiness together. Those marriages are the successful one, and it is those marriage which you will find the true love and the true muhabbat and the true kind of like connection between the husband and the wife. Then you have another type of marriage which is more based on lust. As I explained, based on boyfriend-girlfriend situation, based on when you're young and looking at people's looks over than their manners and over than their akhlaqs more. I'm not saying that we can't look at the woman or vice versa, their looks, no. What I'm trying to explain is that that is given priority by sometimes people when they're young over adab, over manners, over akhlaq and over deen. Now those types of marriages, as I said, illa masha'Allah, many of them eventually they kind of break down because it was just based on lust. And one of the things about lust is that you have a lust for something, but then afterwards that lust and that craving goes. That's the thing about lust. Whereas if there was something meaningful, then that relationship kind of like stays for a longer period. But generally speaking, one of the things about lust is that it stays there, but then afterwards it kind of like dissipates. So that's why 2-3 years maximum there will be in a marriage. Then afterwards the man will get tired of the wife will get tired of the husband, and then they look for a divorce and a way out. So why that happens is because initially the foundation of such marriages was based on lust, and the barakah of that does not remain, and after a while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He removes that and takes that away from people. If we then move on to the next point with regards to the importance of marriage, again there are some Quranic verses which have been mentioned there. The very famous Quranic verse about marriage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahun. Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahun. So they, i.e. the wives, the women, are concealment for you and you are concealment for them. Now, libas means clothing or it means concealment. And Imam Qurtubi rahimullah, a great mufassir, whilst commentating on this particular ayat, he has explained the wisdom and the reason why marriage has been described with the word libas. The purpose, the hikmah behind why marriage has been described with this word libas. Now, libas means clothing, and there are two benefits of clothing. Number one is that it protects you from the heat and the cold. So that's number one. And number two is that when you're wearing clothes, it makes you feel comfortable. It gives you peace and tranquility. So two benefits of clothing. Number one is that it protects you from the cold and the heat. And number two is that when you're wearing clothes, it makes you feel comfortable. It gives you peace, it gives you tranquility. And subhanAllah, that is the exact same benefit and wisdom in relation to nikah. Because when you get married, there are two benefits. Number one, when you get married, is that it protects you from sins. Yeah, there's hadiths which we'll look at later. One hadith which comes to mind, which I can just quote to you now, is there's a hadith which can be found in Sahih Muslim, and also it can be found in Tirmidhi and also in Abu Dawud as well, that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam once, it says, Innal mar'ata tukbilu fi surati shaytan wa tudbiru fi surati shaytan. فَإِذَا أَبْصَرَ أَحَدُكُمْ إِمْرَأَةً فَلْيَأْتِ أَهْلَهُ فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ يَرُدُّ مَا فِي نَفْسِهِ فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ يَرُدُّ مَا فِي نَفْسِهِ. In other words, what this particular hadith is telling us, that sometimes your glance may fall on a strange woman. So your glance may fall. You know, she may be beautiful, she may be good looking, she may be wearing some revealing clothes, especially in the society we live in. So then we are humans at the end of the day. So when we look at her, remember, one glance is allowed. So we looked at her, then that lust, that feeling comes into our heart. Now, if we weren't married, as I was mentioning at the beginning about sexual frustration, so if we weren't married, then that frustration would have built and built and built. So therefore, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has practically given us advice and nasiha, and he said that when you have those types of feelings and urges, then what you should do, فَلْيَأْتِ أَهْلَهُ. You should go to your wife, fulfill your needs with her, fulfill your desires with her, because indeed by doing that, يَرُدُّ مَا فِي نَفْسِهِ, meaning whatever lust and whatever cravings you had, then that has now been repelled by you approaching and fulfilling your needs with your wife. So the point I was trying to make here is that first and foremost, nikah and marriage saves you from sins. Just imagine in that situation when we looked at an unlawful woman and her looks captivated our hearts. If we weren't married, what could have been the possibility? Yes, there are lawful ways around it, that is to fast, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالصَّوْمِ. But just imagine somebody doesn't want to fast and the cravings and the lust is overwhelming. is overtaking it. So then you get these problems now in society regarding pornography, videos on YouTube or other particular channels you'll be watching, or, like as I mentioned, sexual assault, abuse, grooming of young children is also very, very common in the UK as well. Unfortunately, even in our Birmingham, there's been many cases of Muslim men, talking about Muslim men, forget about non-Muslim, Muslim men grooming girls from the age of 9. So all these things are happening, and they are happening because of this particular reason. So first and foremost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has explained that libas, it protects you from the cold and from the heat. Likewise, marriage protects you from sins. And also number 2 is the same way clothing is there to kind of like make you feel comfortable and give you that peace and tranquility. Subhanallah, this is what marriage and this is what nikah does. This is what marriage does. Because marriage is something, subhanallah, that it's one of the, I'll say it's perhaps the only way to kind of achieve that tranquility and that peace. Being at home with your wife, with your children, the moments you spend, it's something which money can't buy. And this is again advice to youngsters or even to some of the elder brothers or sisters who are here, perhaps are not married, and perhaps you may have made this intention, I don't want to get married. And what a lot of brothers and sisters do in that situation is to kill time, like, things to like what we call kill time in the UK. They'll probably go out to cinemas, they'll go out to watch a soccer match, or they'll go and watch cricket somewhere, and they think that fulfills their peace and tranquility. But actually, what happens is that just for that few hours, you're getting some kind of enjoyment from that football match or from that soccer match. But then afterwards you go home to that lonely life where there's no peace and tranquility there. And going back to the point which I wanted to make is very, very important, especially for brothers and sisters. What normally happens, and I've noticed this through experience as well, a lot of the brothers in their mid-20s, even sisters mid-20s, late 20s, they kind of like make an intention, you know what, I don't want to get married. Yeah, I don't want to get married. I want to live my whole life not being married. But one thing happens is that life moves on, things move on. And then when they reach the age of 40, mid-40, and they see everybody else around them settling down and having children, and then they see that perhaps their bedrock, who in most of the time tend to be their father and mother, who may have passed away now, and their siblings, everybody settled down, and they just by themselves. Only then the realization of that decision they made early on in their life that they don't want to get married, only then they realize how grave a mistake they made. I know a lot of brothers who made the intention, I don't want to get married, when they were in the 20s. But that's fine. When you're in your 20s, you have your friends around, don't you? So when you feel a bit bored, come on, let's go out to play soccer. Let's go to the movies. Let's go to the cinemas. So that's okay. You kind of like spend time with your friends. But then what happens is that, your friends, they kind of settle down as well. They get married. They have children. And then afterwards, you try to call them and say, come on, let's go out for a meal. Let's go out to the cinemas. Everyone's busy then, innit? Everyone's got children. Everyone's married. Everyone's tied up at home. I got one friend who is actually 1 or 2 years older than me. Again, he's not married. And he's always, every couple of months, like he calls me, oh, Mufti Sahib, let's go out to eat. But I have to decline him every single time. Not because, I'm being arrogant or something, it's because I don't have time. Because either I'm teaching in madrasa or any free time I have, I spend at home with my family. So can you see, like, people who make that decision, oh, I don't want to get married, they think that in the late 30s, those friends who were not married like them in the early 20s, and they used to go out to play football and go to the movies and to go for meals, everyone settles down by then. So all those friends, they've all settled down. And then your bedrock, as I said, your parents who were alive, who were supporting you, then they leave this world as well. So then what happens is that you're just living in a house. Perhaps it was your father's house, your mother's house. Now you're just living there. All your brothers have got married. They have children. They got their own life. Your sisters have all moved out. They've got married. They have children. They've got their own life. And you're just stuck in that house. And do you know when it really hurts? I've noticed when it really hurts. It hurts in occasions such as Eid. Eid time. Because Eid time is for family. So then everyone's busy with their own family. And then that brother or sister who decided not to get married, they're just stuck by themselves. So they don't want to visit their siblings' houses too much because they've got their guests coming over, their in-laws coming over, and other extended family from in-laws' side or that side comes over. And they, on Eid day, when it's supposed to be a day for family, you see they're just like at home, probably go out to pray Salah, they'll come home and they'll stay at home and just do nothing for the rest of the day. It's only on those days it really hits them, that decision they made. So what I want to say to everybody is that marriage is very, very important actually. If you want that tranquility, that peace, if you want some kind of sukoon in life, I'll say definitely go ahead, get married and never make that decision that you want to be single and you want to spend your life in celibacy, because the reality is that later on you will regret that decision. But then by the time when you're in your mid-40s, as you know, they say, you missed the boat. Yes, I'm not saying you can't get married in your mid-40s, you can. But then, like the pool of sisters available will be very, very little compared to when you're in your mid-20s, late 20s and so on. So never make that decision and never regret that. If we move on to the next paragraph or the next slide, which is in front of us, with regards to the virtues of marriage. Some of these hadiths we have come across before. Their references can be found at the bottom of the page. Also, many of these hadiths are found in Mishkat al-Masabi. One or two things to mention is that marriage is a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's mentioned in a hadith of Tirmidhi, Arba'un min sunanil mursalin. 4 things are from the sunnah of all the prophets. And one of them is an-nikah, marriage. Now there are approximately 124,000 prophets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent into this world. And out of the 124,000, 2 prophets did not marry. They were the Prophet Yahya alayhi salatu wasalam. And the reason why he did not get married was he devoted his time for the service and devoted his time for the worshipping of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and also for service to Masjid al-Aqsa. So he did not get married. And the other prophet who did not get married was Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. So at the age of 33, as mentioned in the hadith, Isa alayhi salatu wasalam was elevated and raised to the sky. But it's mentioned in a hadith of Mishkat al-Masabi that before the end of time, and this is the belief of all Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, before the end of time, Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salatu wasalam will descend. And then he will kill the Dajjal. Thereafterwards it's mentioned that Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, he will then perform Hajj. He will settle in Medina Munawwara and he will then get married. So when Isa alayhi salatu wasalam returns back to this world, after killing Dajjal, he will then eventually marry. He will have 2 children. Thereafterwards, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wasalam will pass away naturally and he'll be buried alongside Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when you look at it, out of all the prophets, every single one of them, besides Sayyiduna Yahya alayhi salatu wasalam, performed this particular sunnah of marriage. So that in itself tells us how important of a union and institution it is that, subhanAllah, every single prophet And another great kamal and another great amazing thing about marriage is that there are two ibadat, two worships, which will continue all the way until the hereafter. In other words, there are so many ibadats in this world: praying, fasting, zakat, hajj. But everybody knows when you pass away, in qata anhu amaluhu, all your actions come to an end, all the faraid, all the obligatory acts, they come to an end. But there are two ibadats in particular which will continue in Jannah and in paradise. Number one is Iman, because obviously you need to have Iman to enter Jannah. And the second ibadah and worship which will continue in Jannah and paradise will be nikah, will be marriage. Because in Jannah and paradise, there's no prayers, there's no fasting, there's no hajj, there's no zakat, there's no studying. But there is nikah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will get you married towards the hura'in. So the union of marriage, subhanallah, will still continue even in Jannah and even in paradise. So as I was saying that there are many virtues of getting married. If we look at the hadiths which are on page 3, in particular, if we look at hadith number 2, a very famous hadith that Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, when a man marries, he has fulfilled half of his religion, so let him fear Allah regarding the remaining half. فَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ نِصْفَ الْبَاقِ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Now, let's have a look at the first part of the hadith. When a man marries, he has fulfilled half of his religion. Now, there's like a quote which I would like to mention. I think it's very beneficial. And even experiences in life indicates and points towards this as well. This quote has been written by or given by Shah Abdul Haq Muhaddis Dehlwi, rahimullah, in his Lam'at. Now, in his Lam'at, Shah Abdul Haq Muhaddis Dehlwi has mentioned that when somebody gets married, he has fulfilled half of his religion. He's mentioned that the word nisf can sometimes be in the meaning of akthar. The word nisf, half, can sometimes be in the meaning of the majority. And without going into too detail, but I know, mashallah, there's a lot of ulamas here in this particular program, but there are certain opinions of the scholars, Imam Abu Yusuf rahimullah in particular, who says that half, nisf, is considered to be in the ruling of kul. So a good example will be a qurbani animal. A qurbani animal. So as you know, one of the conditions of qurbani animals is that the tails cannot be cut or the ears cannot be cut. So Imam Yusuf rahimullah says that if half of the tail is cut, it's considered to be the entire tail being cut. Hence, that animal cannot be accepted for qurbani. And likewise, he has the same rule with regards to the ears of the qurbani animal as well. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimullah is of the opinion of thuluth, 1/3. So if 1/3 of the tail is cut, then you can't accept it for qurbani. If it's 1/3 of the ears are cut, then you can't accept it for qurbani. Khair, as I said, this is not a qurbani course, but I'm just adding that rule here. So the point I'm trying to make is that the word nisf can sometimes be in the meaning of akthar. So what Shah Sahib is saying is when a man marries, for some men, marrying is actually what fulfilling his entire religion. He's fulfilling his complete religion. In what way? Subhanallah, we've seen many examples, haven't we, where there are many brothers who are not practicing. But subhanallah, they got married to a girl or to a woman who herself is practicing, and then that woman then sorts out her husband. What I mean by that, sorts him out in terms of, puts him in line, makes him more practicing on deen and piety, and then, they go for Hajj, they go for Umrah, and then afterwards they kind of change their lives. And so many examples like that, where many youngsters who I know in Birmingham, they were known as the bad boys, the gangsters, the bad boys. SubhanAllah, they got married to a girl, and she was herself practicing, and then SubhanAllah, just through that, that guy changed his entire life. And now, mashallah, he's got beard, he's practicing, he comes to the prayers, he goes for khuruj, goes for tabligh. Why? Just because of a bit of effort which the wives made on the husband as well. So this is like also at the same time a bit of nasiha for sisters, because I know sometimes I also deal with marital issues as well. So sometimes sisters complain that, oh, my husband doesn't listen to me, and so on and so forth, or my husband's doing this, my husband's doing that. Sometimes, even sisters, they need to have sabr and patience, and they need to work on their husband. Because subhanAllah, this is like a kamal, this is something amazing, that when it comes to women or wives, even the strictest of men, they get like lured in, if that makes sense. That's what Allah says. So that's why it's mentioned in the hadith as well, isn't it? But even the strictest of men, they get lured as well, and they fall for the charms of women. So what I want to say to every sisters in particular is that work on your husbands. If your husbands are not practicing, doesn't mean we give up, because I'll talk about that later, inshallah, because of nowadays lack of steadfastness, lack of sabr. We just want instant results. So as soon as a marriage doesn't work, we just want it to be sorted out there and there. If it isn't, then we'll just move on and get married to somebody else. That's not really the case. So sometimes we, as well, the sisters in particular, need to work on the husband. But going back to the hadith here, for some men, subhanAllah, getting married is actually does not fulfill half of their religion. It actually fulfills their entire religion. They make a total 180 degrees turn, and they become more practicing. And this is what something marriage and nikah does. I think there's another example we could use of even Hajj as well. I've noticed that people who have been really, really in sins and in the path of misguidance, they go for Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes them. And I've also noticed this with nikah and marriage as well, that they may have been in sins and doing evil, but as soon as they get married, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes them. So this is subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's barakah on this particular union of marriage and nikah. Okay, then on the next page number 4, again, there's no need for me to go over every single point. Just explain some quotes, some marriage quotes and so on, regarding a wife, like a pious wife. So again, many of these hadiths, alhamdulillah, which we have come across before. And likewise, even on page number 5, regarding the purpose of nikah, I've already, alhamdulillah, discussed some of the wisdom, purpose of nikah. Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahun, quoted Imam Qurtubi's words, inshallah, earlier. So again, that's something which has been mentioned in passing earlier on in the discussion. I'm not sure whether it's been 45 minutes or not, but I think probably maybe. So if any brothers or sisters have any questions before we move on to the next segment regarding the fiqh aspect of marriage. So the first part was just about introduction, the fadail, so we kind of, inshallah.
Just I'll explain the format quickly, because a lot of late comes.
Okay.
Sorry, you got good volume.
Okay.
Just the format for the latecomers is that Mufti will speak 45 minutes, and some time he'll give for people to write. Some papers have been, white sheets have been distributed. You write your questions, and they'll be said same thing it's been organised from the ladies' side as well. So just write your questions as you're going through the thing. Instead of leaving all the questions till the end of the day at a Q&A, as each segment that we're doing, there'll be question and answers, inshallah. This will make it a little bit more interactive, because it is quite a long session till 5-6 p.m. So if people can just write any questions they have, or pass the paper around, give a minute or two, and then those questions will be passed. The sisters on the other side, she's been appointed for collecting the answered questions, and they'll be passed to Mufti Sahib, read them and answer them, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Am I just holding this? Yeah, I feel like it's on. Yeah, battery's low. Get the backup one. Technology failed. This on? Yeah, it's just. Yeah, the battery's good on that one. You charge it for this? How do you charge it? Or you have to replace the battery?
Is it on?
He was fooling around with it. Maybe we'll just swap the battery. It's on? Very low. Just put a bit sort of things. It's me and one on the middle one. We're putting the batteries in. That one's got 3 bars. That one's okay.
You can change the battery or increase the volume for this one. Because that volume is very low.
Yeah.
2 options, either change the battery or
Oh,
increase the volume.
Yes, sure, carry on.
102.
Let's carry on, inshallah. Okay, Bismillah. I'll just carry on with the second section of the course. So, as I was saying, the first part was just mainly on the Fadail introduction. So, it was kind of like a bit straightforward. I didn't want to spend too much time on the Fadail. Now we're going to move on to more like the fiqh aspect of marriage. Again, this section will be more beneficial to youngsters, brothers and sisters who are thinking or who are planning to get married. And also at the same time, it will be also beneficial for our elders who may have children, sons or daughters, who they are thinking of getting married. Now, in front of us, we have the rules of getting married. Like, we always talk about the fadails of marriage, and I mentioned just now that it completes half of your deen and your religion. But we always get asked this question that what is the fiqhi rule? What is the legal rule in relation to getting married? What's the exact rule in terms of getting married? Now, if we have a look at the rulings which has been mentioned, there are few situations. So there isn't a definite answer that it's fard or it's sunnah or it's wajib. It just depends on the situation. For some brothers or sisters, it may be, say for example, fard, and that is when there is an overwhelming level of desire in a way that he or she is certain of committing adultery. So, for example, if someone is in such a situation that he feels that if they don't get married, he most likely will fall and end up in committing zina and adultery, then for him or her, marriage becomes fard. So going back to what I mentioned a little while ago about sexual frustration, classic example, where people wanting to get married, they can't get married for one reason or the other, or they found someone but their parents are not allowing them to get married. So in such situations where the frustration is overwhelming, it's beyond the acceptable limit, there's now a danger that they may commit fornication and zina, then in that situation it becomes fard and obligatory for one to get married. Then if we look at the third situation, in normal moderate situation, it is considered to be an emphasized sunnah a sunnat muakkada to get married. And there are also, subhanAllah, situations where it's actually haram for somebody to get married. And that is where someone fears, or as parents, you know that your son or your daughter, by getting them married, they are going to be unjust and unfair to their spouses, to the husband or to the wife. In that situation, it actually becomes haram and unlawful for a man or a woman to get married, or as parents, for you to even get your son and your daughter married in that particular situation. And again, this is something which is very, very common. Sometimes where, like the classic example which we've even dealt with at Darul Ifta, is where the father or the parents, they knew that there was something wrong with their son in terms of he was impotent. They knew that. Like he wasn't able to kind of like fulfill the desires of his wife. You know, they knew there was something wrong with him. But to save that dignity of the family, what they did was they got the boy married to somebody. Obviously, within a year, that marriage broke. Because obviously the girl's family found out that there's something wrong with the guy. So obviously they cancelled the marriage. But then the boy's family, again, goes back to that point about honor, izzat. So they were like saying, no, it's not our son's fault, it was the girl's fault. They pinned all the blame on the girl's family. But the reality was that there was something wrong with the boy. But they didn't want anyone to know about that issue. Because obviously, especially nowadays, well, not nowadays, it's always been the case. You know, like people sometimes start asking, oh, your son's in his 20s, 30s, he's not getting married. Kya baat hai? Why? What's the problem? So obviously, parents can't really go around and say, oh, there's something wrong with our son. So what they did was that to cover up the situation, they got him married. Within a year, the marriage broke. And then they pinned all the blame on the girl, that no, she was the evil one, she was the bad person, she caused the marriage to falter, she caused the marriage to break. So there has been situations like that where you'll be surprised, just with their intention to save the family honor. It's not really honor, by the way, but just for that thing, they'll get their son and daughter married, knowing too right there's something wrong with their son and daughter, but they'll get them married. Sometimes they may do with good intentions, like I just mentioned, that they may think that, oh, you know what, let's just get our son married. Perhaps when he gets married and he's in contact with a woman, I know his urges may kind of increase or something like that. So sometimes they do it with good intention, but sometimes they don't do it with good intention. So what I want to explain is that where you know that there's something wrong with your son, with your daughter, he's unstable mentally, or things like that, it's very, very important that you don't go ahead and get them married, because there may be problems later on in the future. So there are actually situations where to get married is actually unlawful and haram. Which then takes me on to another point, which I kind of briefly mentioned before, regarding finances. That a lot of the brothers in particular make this an issue nowadays, also sometimes parents as well, that, oh, we can't get him married now because we don't have any money. Or the son will say, or the boy will say that, look, I don't want to marry now because of financial issues. Like, I don't have a house, I don't have a car, I'm not working, I don't have any income coming in. So the question which I want to mention is that should we make financial issues as a barrier, as a mani', as a barrier to prevent going ahead with marriage? So the answer is, from an Islamic perspective, is no. Look, as long as, the key thing is, as long as the man is able to afford the dowry, the mahar, which we will look at later, and also at the same time, he's able to look after his wife in terms of her nafaqah, expenses, and her accommodation. So as long as he's able to do something like that, whether he himself is working or whether he's getting some support from family, but he's able to provide these two things, then he should not use finance as an issue or as a preventive matter so that he does not get married. And nor should the family should use that, and nor should sometimes the bride or the sisters should also use that as an issue to not to get married to a particular person. And I just want to quote a couple of things, inshallah, regarding this particular topic. Like it's mentioned in Maqasidul Hasana, where it says, Iltamisu ar-rizqa bin nikah. Iltamisu ar-rizqa bin nikah. Which means that search for provision through nikah and through marriage. It's also mentioned in the Quran as well. إِن يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاء يُغْنِهِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. That if they are poor, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make them yugni, i.e. rich, independent, self-sufficient, min fadlihi, from his fadl and from his grace. So what I want to say to everyone is that don't use finance as an issue not to go ahead with a marriage. Parents should definitely should not use that as an issue and should not put any kind of pressure on their sons. Okay, look, I'm not saying that you should just allow your sons not to work and for them just to be lazy and lying around at home. No, you should also make them proactive and so on. But what I mean by that is demands on your sons in particular. That look, you can only get married if you have a house. If you're earning this much amount of money, only then you could get married. No, there's no need for you to put so much of these types of demands. Because what will happen is that it will probably take him 10 years, 15 years for him to earn that much amount of money that he's able to afford his own car, he's able to afford his own house. But by the time he's like what? Owns all these things, he's in his probably 40. And then he goes back to that point which I mentioned before. By then he just missed the boat. So the pool of sisters which he has to choose from will be very, very little. So what I want to say is that actually get married, and you'll see through marriage and through the barakah of marriage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually make you more stronger financially. And again, and whether that strength in finance is, whether it's through, how should I say, you earning or working, or sometimes it could be even through the help of governments as well. So what I mean by that is, I'm not sure how it works in Australia, but sometimes, like in the UK, we have something called working tax credit. So working tax credit, what it means is that it's only for married couples. Married couples, they receive like extra allowance from the government if you are working, say, 16 hours a week or something on those lines. So you actually get an extra amount from the government, an extra £100, extra £150 from the government for just being married. So subhanAllah, even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that even though you may be poor, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you independent and self-sufficient. Even the government will help you. That's why during Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu's time, whenever the male fay, so there's different types of booties. So one is called fay. Fay was that amount which was taken from the non-Muslims, not through wars and battles, but mainly through taxes, kharaj and jizya. So what Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu used to do is that those people, those sahabas, those tabi'ins, those who were married, he would give them more from the male fay than those who are single. So those who had family, who were married, Umar radiallahu ta'ala who used to give them more from the male fay compared to the ones who were single. So subhanAllah, what we can derive from here is that even the policy within an Islamic country is that those who are married, they will get more kind of help from a governmental perspective than those who are single. So can you see? So that notion that, oh no, we have to earn this much and only then we can get married and we can settle is actually incorrect. Even you'll see that whether it's from the government, whether it's from the Islamic State, or whether it's just through like family support, you will see that those who get married, inshallah, at the beginning, family will always help you out. And I'm sure there's a lot of brothers here, think back to your own marriage, those who are married, and think back that when you got married, what did you have then and what you have now? Okay, I could talk about myself. I remember when I got married, it was in 2008 it was, I was just like straight out of madrasa, straight out of Darul Ilms. So obviously those will know that when you come straight out of a madrasa, it's not like you have so much money in your bank account. So when I got married, I had very little amount of money. Even now, I won't say I have a lot of amount of money, but I'll say it's much better than 10 years ago when I got married first. So can you see, like when you get married, subhanAllah, to the barakah, you have children, there's always support from family, there's always support from the government, you always get the extra allowances. Alhamdulillah, you tend to be more financially better off, I'll say, than say, for example, being single. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised. So what I want to say to everyone is that don't use finance as an issue not to get married. And likewise, parents in particular, please don't use that as a pressure on your children that, no, you need to earn this much, only then we will allow the marriage to you, to so and so. No, make sure that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He works in mysterious ways. And sometimes it happens that there may be nothing there, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the barakah will always kind of like give you extra. Now if we move on to the next particular point, like as I was saying before that, even subhanAllah, like even Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but even Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, it's mentioned in Tafsir ibn Kathir. Some of you may be aware of this particular quote or statement. So when Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was created, he was alone by himself in Jannah. He was alone by himself in Jannah. He was like alone. So he was alone by himself in Jannah, and then it's mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then created Hazrat Hawa radiyallahu ta'ala anha from the back portion of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam's left rib. From the back portion of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam's left rib. Whilst Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was sleeping. So Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was sleeping, and then from his left rib, Hazrat Hawa radiyallahu ta'ala anha was created. When Adam alayhi salatu wasalam woke up, it's mentioned that he then stretched his hands to touch her. So the angel said to Adam alayhi salatu wasalam that you can't touch her unless you give a dowry. So then Adam alayhi salatu wasalam asked that what is her dowry? So the angel said that you recite 20 times Durood Sharif. 20 times Durood Sharif, you recite that will be the dowry for Hazrat Hawa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. This is mentioned in Ibn Kathir. The point I'm trying to make is that even Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, he was in Jannah. SubhanAllah, Jannat is amazing. Look, if there is one place where you think you can live by yourself, it's going to be where? Jannat. Because Jannat is Jannat. You could have whatever you want. But even then, Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, he was alone. He felt lonely. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Hazrat Hawa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And this is the point which I want to actually explain. Should have mentioned it before. That sometimes, we could have everything in this world. We could have money. We could have the latest cars, the latest gadgets, the latest phones, the biggest of mansions. But unless there's someone there, like a female companion or a spouse, all these things, to tell the truth, it's kind of meaningless. It doesn't really mean anything unless we can enjoy that spiritually and with our wives and with our spouses. Now, moving along to the next point, next page, I should say, page number 7. This is more important. With regards to selecting a partner and a spouse. Now, a lot of questions people tend to ask, so it's very important that we kind of go over this properly and thoroughly. So, we've looked at the rulings of nikah and marriage. Now we're going to move on to the next part in relation to what kind of spouses and partners. Salah time.
Azan's in 12 minutes.
Take inshallah.
So maybe we answer the questions now and just
Okay, take inshallah.
finish with that lot of questions.
Take it, then we start this after Salat. Okay, so what we'll do is that we'll take some questions now because obviously the next topic is going to be quite long, and plus Salatul Zuhr is in 12 minutes time. So inshallah I'll take some questions and so on. So what I'll do is I'll read the question out so everybody knows what exactly I'm answering, and then inshallah we'll take it from there. First question is, why should we risk marrying a brother or a sister who is much less practicing than us? No salah, not eating halal, does not dress modestly. I think this question obviously is referring to that point I made earlier about فَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ نِصْفَ الْبَاقِي, and I said that, look, sometimes it happens that you may get married, or a sister may get married to someone non-practicing, and thereafterwards that sister, because she's kind of firm, then she changes her husband's life. Now let me just clarify, perhaps I should have clarified it then. There's two different things. One is that when it comes to choosing a spouse, that which is within our own control. So yes, we should look at what is mentioned in the hadiths, and this is a topic which we will be looking at after Salatul Zuhr, and that is that we should look at walidiniha, someone who is practicing and pious. So yes, when it comes to choosing a spouse, we should always look at someone who is practicing, someone who is religious. The point I was making earlier is sometimes, look, it happens. I know we should look at someone who's practicing, but come on, I'm sure you know a lot of marriages where what has happened? The sister's practicing, but then somehow she got married to a non-practicing man. Likewise with the men, sometimes they are very practicing, but then through somehow or somewhere, they got married to someone who's not practicing. So I was just explaining that, look, in that situation where I'm not encouraging that you should go ahead and get married to people who are not practicing, because that is risky. And we look at it under this next section, under the compatibility section, because such marriages, because they're not compatible with each other, will always be problems and so on. But you know what? Sometimes it happens, isn't it? Like in life, you just get married to someone who's not practicing. You yourself may have not been practicing then, and then you got married to someone who's not practicing, but then afterwards you find the truth and you become practicing, but your wife isn't, or vice versa, because that could also be the case as well, where sometimes both the sister and the brother were not practicing. Then the sister becomes practicing. She starts wearing the hijab and so on. She gets practicing, and then she wants to change her husband. Then yes, sometimes it can happen in that way. So regarding this particular question, yes, we should always look at someone who's practicing. But if things happen that we got married to someone who's not practicing, then we should not let go, but rather we should strive and work hard, and inshallah hope that our spouse changes for the good in that situation. Okay, the next question is, clothes are to show off apart from hot and cold. I think they're referring to that ayat I was quoting, hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahun. So yes, clothes are also there for beautification as well, in warisha. So that's true as well. I was just quoting what Imam Qurtubi has said. and he said that, look, the reason why marriage has been described with clothing was for those two reasons. One was for peace and tranquility, and the other one was to ward off sins. So yes, clothes are also for showing beautification as well. And point number 2 is that if you see a beautiful woman and you come home and your wife is not beautiful, then what? I think the point isn't regarding beauty here. I think it's regarding the lust, the craving. That's why he says in the hadith, فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ يَرُدُّ مَا فِي نَفْسِهِ. So the issue, like when you look at a woman, yes, I know she may be beautiful, but when you look at the issue, it's not really beauty, it's the lust which has attracted you to her. So then that's lust at the end of the day. So when you come to your wife, you fulfill your desires, then you're fulfilling the lust and the craving. What is the best avenue in finding a wife? Inshallah, we'll touch on that, inshallah, under the selecting a partner section. So inshallah, we'll discuss that particular question in detail after Salatul Zuhr. Again, this question here is regarding because zulm is happening from many different angles. I think that was one of the points I mentioned at the beginning. That's why it's mentioned that it's better to stay single. So I kind of answered that question that, yes, we may feel that it's best to remain single, but as I already said, a lot of people make that decision. You know, they look at their friends, they look at their families, and they think, oh, all the problems, I don't want that hassle anymore. I don't want the hassle, full stop. So they want to remain single. But then what happens is that eventually, when everybody settles down, they have children, everybody moves on with life, then that's when they feel lonely. And they kind of regret that particular decision they made of remaining single. So the advice I'll give to this brother or sister, whoever asked this question, is that don't make that mistake. Don't have that regret. Yes, I know sometimes it could be challenging to get married. You know, sometimes, you know, they are extended family. There could be that extra aggro, which perhaps you don't want to get involved. But in the long run, it's much, much better to get married and to be in a union of marriage rather than, say, for example, to remain single. And next question. Students that don't have time to work but want to get married, what should they do? I think for students it's important that you don't get married. I think this is just there's no masla or fiqh regarding it, but my opinion is that students shouldn't get married until you finish your course. Because what happens is that when you are studying and you're married as well, you don't really focus on both. I've dealt with a lot of issues in that particular department, even within our own madrasa, where students, whilst they're studying, they get married, so they don't do the studies well, so they get in trouble from their ustads for not, recapping, not learning their lesson. Then they get complaints from their wives, or you're spending too much time in madrasa, and then there's just like issues. So what I would say is that just finish off your course, and then afterwards settle down properly and thoroughly then. So I think that would be my advice regarding that. And last, do we have time, or shall I take it afterwards? Okay. Will there be barakah in the marriage if they were unlawful? So this question here is, will there be barakah in the marriage if their marriage was unlawful except zina, but they repented for it and are now doing things the halal way? So the answer is yes, inshallah. Look, everyone makes mistakes in life. Sometimes, perhaps when we were young, we weren't experienced enough. We were perhaps a bit naive. So we sometimes make mistakes in life. So it could be the case that, yes, we got married to our girlfriend or something like that, and we got married. And you know what? Then we do tawbah from our actions, and then we kind of like repent, and then we try to do things in a proper halal way. So inshallah, there will be barakah in that, inshallah. Next question, selecting a partner. what do you do if a prospective spouse is very practicing with prayers and has strong iman, but is really into music, playing musical instruments? Inshallah, I'll talk about that, inshallah, when we look at the selecting partner section. But I think perhaps whoever is asking the question, whether it's a sister or brother, I think they're probably wanting to know, like, how do we find out their background, perhaps? Like, because there could be someone who, zahiran, apparently they look practicing prayers, everything, but then when you see them, when you speak to them, when you meet them, you realize that it's totally different. Yeah, and we actually spoke about that yesterday, actually, in the hadith course about people praying, but then in reality, their mannerism, their akhlaq is totally poor. So, inshallah, I'll talk about that in terms of how to find out and these things. Always, when it comes to selecting a partner or a spouse, always remember that hadith of Tirmidhi. What did Prophet ﷺ say? He said that if you want to know someone to be good, fas'al jiranak, ask their neighbors. If the neighbors say ahsanta, that you are good, then faqad ahsanta, then indeed you are good. If the neighbors are saying that you are bad, then indeed you are bad. So what we can derive from that hadith is that if you want to know the true reality, don't ask his or her friends. Don't ask his or her cousins or relatives, because obviously everybody's going to side and everybody's going to back up their friends and their family. Go and ask people who live with them, and then you notice the true picture of that individual. So inshallah, we'll mention that later, inshallah. Another question is, yeah, like they want to get married, but it is inevitable that there will be injustice in the marriage. So in that situation, it's best that they don't go ahead with the marriage. They don't go ahead. They could do other things to kind of like curb their desires. But if they feel there's going to be injustice, then it's best they don't go ahead with the marriage. But I think with questions regarding like that, it's best that the individual situations are raised with Mona Khalid Saab or with the local imams or with the local muftis, and they probably give a more precise answer. I think one of the key things is when it comes to personal situations, try my best not to give a general fatwa and say that it's allowed or it's permissible, because people's situation may be different. So just to give an answer or fatwa just based on that information would be slightly difficult for me. So what I would recommend is that if you just speak to your local imams, then that will be fine. What advice would you give to someone who says that getting married will not add anything important to their life? Someone who says getting married. Okay. Yeah, I'll probably disagree with that statement. I think there is a lot of things which will, first and foremost, like children. You have children. فَإِنِّي مُكَاتِلٌ بِكُمُ الْأُمَمِ. When you have children, so much like, subhanAllah, when you have children, you work on your children, you make them hafiz Quran, alim din, the hadith, إِذَا مَاتَ ibn Adam in qata anhu amaluhu illa min thalath. And one of the points is a waladin salihin yad'u la. So they are always like children. Being in a marriage is better than being single, and then there's that danger of committing sins and falling into sins. And also at the same time, regarding the question was about Durud Sharif. So at the time of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, the dowry was 20 times. So I think the question was that, was there Durud Sharif at that time? So the answer is yes, there was. Because remember, whatever we are taught to do in this world, it's all been decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even at that time, Durud and salutations were also formed as well, even though it may not have been prescribed upon Adam alayhi salatu wasalam's ummah, or on Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, or on Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. But all the teachings of this ummah was already prescribed and written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was already preserved in the Lawh Mahfuz, in the preserved tablet. So the answer to that question is that yes, it has been prescribed.
Just run out of time.
Okay, that's fine.
Regarding Azan is now, inshallah. Iqam will be 10 minutes after that. In the masjid, for the ladies outside, the kitchen that's outside the ladies area, some refreshments are there, fruits and some also